Welcome, everyone, to the IIFX Sports and Entertainment Podcast Series. We have a very timely town hall discussion this morning. Why sports and entertainment venues need to prepare for protests and security threats. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jim Mercurio. Jim?
Good morning, Lou. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Ready to go. Fired up.
Indeed, we got a great panel here today, led by a good friend and old colleague of ours, Mike Harnett, who's the VP of Venue Security for Illitz Group out of the Detroit area, I believe, right? Yes. Mike, I'm gonna kick it over to you to kind of introduce the panels and or the panel and get into this topic of great discussion today. So, Mike, I'll turn it over to you and welcome. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. We've assembled an excellent panel with a variety of expertise in this area. So we have Lori Goodell, who is with the Department of Homeland Security, Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, Office of Special Programs. Lori, would you like to say a few words about your background?
Hey, hello, everyone. Yes, I do work for CISA. I know that's a mouthful in the Office of Security Programs. And we work on active assailant preparedness resource creation. And my particular portfolio is hostile vehicle mitigation. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And we also have Police Lieutenant Kendall Bell from the Las Vegas Police Department, one of the busiest police departments when it comes to planning and hosting special events and large crowds. So Lieutenant, can you give us a little bit of information about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Kendall Bell. I've been on the Las Vegas Police Department for 24 years. I am currently the events planning commander for our agency. We're responsible for planning all major events, whether it's sporting, people at resorts, when the president comes to town. So we are a very busy section. I've been doing this position for about 7 years now, and I'm happy to be here today and speak with everyone.
Thank you. Then we have Senior Commander Brad Hazlett from the St. Paul, Minnesota Police Department, where they've hosted a number of large special events, including the Republican National Convention in 2008 and the 2018 Super Bowl. And then obviously they've had a number of variety of experience with some of the unrest with the George Floyd and Dante Wright incidents. So Commander Hazlett, could you give us some brief background on your experience?
Certainly, I'm Brad Hazlett. I'm the Senior Commander of our Special Operations Unit. We deal with all the planning, organizing, and protecting of large events, festivals, concerts, sporting events, all First Amendment issues, protests, riots, things of that nature. And I've been a police officer with our department for 28 years now.
Thank you. And then we also have Dr. Lindsay Getson from Premier Training Services. So she's going to talk about some of the importance of training and some of the programs available. Could you give us some of your background, Doctor?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am a program director of a Doctor of Medical Science and Health Science program at University of the Pacific. My specialty is in education and evaluation and research. And so really diving into how people learn and how we know that they're learning and keeping up with educational trends. So at Premier Training Services, we've developed a lot of really interesting materials and solutions for training. So I'm excited to talk to you all about that today.
Well, thank you. So we want to start out and discuss what the current national landscape is and what type of threats that we're seeing from protests that may impact large events and sports events. So, Lori, could you give us, your what you're seeing at a national level from CISA?
Sure. So I think a good place to point for this answer is to the testimony that FBI Director Christopher Wray did on April 11th when he was in a congressional budget hearing. Essentially, he outlined a number of different kinds of violent threats, but he did say specifically that as you see on the screen here, the breadth of these threats and challenges are as complex as any time in our history, and the consequences of not responding to and countering threats and challenges have never been greater. So I think that's pretty broad, and it speaks to how important it is to have awareness and prevention measures in place.
Great. Lieutenant Bell, what are the types of incidents that you're seeing in Las Vegas, and how have they changed over the past several years?
We've been very fortunate here in Las Vegas where we haven't seen a lot of incidents that have really impacted our events. We do get some protesters who do come outside the exterior perimeter of some of our locations. For the most part, we are able to meet with them, understand what it is they're trying to protest and what their ultimate goal is. And we work with them to provide them with a First Amendment zone that they typically work out of. And by doing so, giving them a location where they can see the event, they still feel close. They feel more compelled to go over and work with us. So very fortunate for us. We haven't seen some of the incidents that we've seen in other cities around this great U.S. of ours.
Commander Hazlitt, what are you seeing in St. Paul, and how are these different tactics and protests evolving?
Sure. So the most prevalent protest that we're seeing lately is groups that are aligned with pro-Palestine. They're certainly making a large presence on campuses all across the United States. And while sporting events may not have a nexus with Israel, Palestine, or any of those things, what it does offer is a big stage with amazing visibility. And groups, regardless of what their philosophy, ideology is, they're always looking for a big stage. Major League Baseball, football, basketball, hockey offer that stage. So we've got to be prepared that could be perhaps an evolution or a goal of theirs is to take over, especially a nationally televised game. We've got to be wary of that and be prepared to prevent that from happening. And like Kendall's saying, we're very, for First Amendment protests. If you want to protest outside of a stadium and you're not corrupting ingress, egress, or preventing emergency vehicles from coming in, we're more than happy to set up a location for people to protest. But as you'll see in some of the videos that we're going to show, sometimes those protests make their way out onto the field or onto the racetrack, and that we can't have that.
Yeah, Brad, I was gonna kind of good segue for that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance associated with the pre-planning for something like that, knowing that you have a designed location for protests in advance. Can you talk about the importance of that, how to set that up, and how somebody who might be on the call that's running a venue would benefit from the interconnectivity with the law enforcement teams, and how to go about that?
Certainly. So the good news is, the silver lining is that most protests don't just pop up as a huge surprise. If you're really using intelligence, you're using your intelligence assets, most large protests are organized and communicated via open source social media. So if you're paying attention to that and your intel units are following that, they'll usually give you pretty good heads up that, hey, there's about to be a protest at the Twins game or the Minnesota Wild game or any sporting event, and then you can plan accordingly. Keep also in mind that the officers and security that are at any one of these events are truly designed to deal with people that are hopping the fence, trying to get into the venue illegally. You're dealing with drunken, disorderly type calls. They're not designed to deal with spontaneous protests. We need to have specially trained officers to deal with that, strike teams, mobile field force. So if we have a heads up that this is about to happen, we would staff accordingly and bring a lot more police and security assets to the venue that we believe is about to be exploited.
Yeah. And Mike, not to put you on the spot as the guy that's kind of running the conversation here, but you've got to have some experience as well running the facility venue security. Can you talk a little bit about how you interface with the law enforcement? Because I think that's where we don't want this lost on us, where it's not just a police officer's or police department's responsibility, right? It's the venue and the police department. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you handle that.
I think it's critical to have close relationship with your public sector partners in the police department, the DHS, the FBI, and with our fusion centers. So we in Detroit, we have a close relationship with all of those entities and really try to work together to plan our, response if there's going to be an incident revolving around a protest, and also to share information. And the quicker that we're able to get a heads up that there is something that may be coming our way, we can work together with the different agencies and come up with a plan and make sure that we're unified so that everybody's working together and nobody's doing anything that is going to conflict with different departments or different entities' procedures.
Well, let me ask Kendall, when you were talking about relationships, what are the key components of a strong relationship in the community?
Well, we're very fortunate here in Las Vegas where we have a very strong relationship with not only our first responder partners, but with our resort partners, everyone. We make it a concerted effort for us to go out and create and foster these relationships. As Brad mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we're able to communicate effectively with everyone. We want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And we want to make sure everybody has the same goal, and that's to make sure all of our events are safe, whether it's an event at your venue or not. Because unfortunately, here being a tourism destination, one bad event at one location can impact other locations. So everyone here in Las Vegas has a common goal to make sure that all of our events are safe, whether it's an MGM property, a Caesars property, the Wynn, does not matter. Everyone works together. So relationships, to me, I always tell my people here in my office that relationships aren't everything, they are everything. So as we discussed yesterday, when we do our planning efforts, communication, cooperation, and coordination are the top three things for me for planning. And we make sure that we achieve all three of those every time we come to the plate to plan for one of our events.
Well, you guys just coming off the Super Bowl too, here's a perfect example of working not just within the venue, but outside of it. And then knowing that there was more people coming to your city, like most of your events, I would imagine, for the downtown issue, knowing what's affected downtown and what's being affected in and around Allegiant Stadium has got to be something that you guys were very conscious about.
We were. One thing that we talked about in all our planning meetings is our plan has to be overarching. The focus for the Super Bowl cannot just be on Allegiant Stadium. We had to be concerned about the Strip corridor. We had to be concerned about the downtown corridor. So we had a planning effort that encompassed all of that. So when you guys just kind of going back to some of the protesting and all that First Amendment section that we try to give people, we also have a dedicated group of officers here. They're called our Homeland Saturation Team. They are specially trained officers. We have 4 squads of them. And their role is to come to events where we think there's going to be protesting. So they're able to defeat some of the tactics that are used by these groups. So when we get information, as the commander said earlier, a lot of times this information is known well before the event. We'll have those officers here. They'll come with a large trailer. They have lots of turtle suits. They have everything we need to defeat protesters if it comes to that situation. So a lot of times we don't have to deal with that. Thank goodness. I'm sure at some point we will. But then also we're also getting information from our fusion center. We're getting information from our resort partners. Everybody is collaborating and sharing information to help us understand what's coming our way and to try to prevent it from happening.
And then, Lori, what are some of the resources that CISA would provide in these type of situations and assistance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the outset, I just want to tag on to something that Lieutenant Bell just said, and that is, partnerships happen way in advance of an incident. You're not going to have your mutual aid forming in the moment. So really foot stomp what he said there and start those partnerships early. One of the ways you can do that is through a protective security advisor. CISA has a cadre of physical, cyber, and voting security specialists throughout the country, and you can reach out to your local protective security advisor to leverage those kinds of resources and also for help with on the ground planning and risk mitigation. CISA also has a really good tabletop exercise package. Actually, we have a whole website full of tabletop exercise packages, but one in particular that is focused on civil disturbance and unrest and enables the user to, oh, there's our resource list. Thank you, Chris. Enables the user to just kind of walk through in advance what could go wrong, what could go sideways, how will we respond, and start walking through those steps in a safe, pre-planned environment. And so that's one I would definitely point to.
And we'll get into a little more detail at the end as to some of these resources. But Jim, why is it important to have a plan to deal with protests, just like any other security threats?
Listen, I think if you just look at the recent current events that took place in San Francisco, and I don't know if it was Lori or Lieutenant Bell, or maybe it was all of you that talked about tactics that these folks are now using. I think the fact that they are either deemed successful or they feel relatively successful to the protester brings pause to me as a guy that would be running venues and events, right? And so I think what I think starts to happen is people look at the tactics in this particular case. There's a clip here, maybe we'll show it in a minute, but where they shut off the Golden Gate Bridge, and it wasn't just for 5 minutes; it was for 6 to 7 to 8 hours, because they glued and cemented themselves together. And now the tactics that they would use to close that street, imagine if it was used in your venues. And so somebody made the comment that it's not just the venue you have to be mindful about anymore, it's everything in and around your venue. And it's not just at your drip line of the building, or it's not just at the parking lot of the facility that you may manage. It's anything and everything around it, leading up to and leaving your facility. Because imagine you've got 70,000 people and somebody decides that they want to do that in your main thoroughfare leading into your event. And so how do you respond to that? And to Brad's kind of point, people that work in the game have a different perspective and job responsibility. They're going to have to call on resources, and that's not something that happens overnight. And so if you don't plan for this, if you don't have some sort of an understanding, and planning is not just 5 minutes before the game, it is something that you got to kind of really pay attention to. So I think there's some real threats here, because if you're successful in closing down the Golden Gate Bridge, imagine what those tactics could be like if they did that to your event. So now you're not just worrying about a stoppage of an event, you're looking at a potential cancellation of it, and who wants that, on your watch? So
we're going to stay on
here's
these
the
live
actual video
pictures over the Golden Gate Bridge this morning, because this has really been the scene for the past few hours out there. Imagine the frustration for the people that were actually just stopped in their cars, as they have been for hours now, as they were attempting to cross the Golden Gate Bridge. For southbound directions closed this morning, a little bit after 8 o'clock this morning, as protesters unfurled banners there. And then eventually the CHP closed down the northbound lanes of the Golden Gate Bridge as well. Just one of many scenes playing out across the Bay Area this morning. On the right of your screen there, that is in Oakland at 880 southbound this morning, where originally that's where protesters took to the roadways, getting out cement barrels, chaining themselves to them, shutting down traffic this morning. Northbound lanes there have been at just at a crawl, as you see. And then once again at 880 and 980 this morning as well. Multiple scenes across the Bay Area, protesters shutting down roadways, and it has been a long, slow protest to open up the roads.
Yeah, there you.
So I don't think that happens without any coordination, right, Brad? I mean, you talked a little bit about this. This is likely a bunch of open source communication going on here. Maybe you talk a little bit about how, without giving the bad guys, all of your resources and tactics that you use. But it's not just, again, the police. It's also venues could be searching their sites and paying attention to some of that social media stuff, right?
I would absolutely highly recommend that if you run a venue, a stadium, a racetrack, you should always be scouring social media, using the keywords of your venue to see if there is a scheduled protest. Is anybody trying to exploit an event that you have coming up, a week from now? And I'll also say that something like closing a bridge, a choke point, doesn't take a whole lot of people. You see there, it looked like there was maybe three to five people. It wouldn't take a lot of people to really shut that down and have major impacts over a metropolitan area. The key is to act quickly when you see things like that start to happen. Don't allow momentum to be gained by the people that are trying to exploit the event. You're going to see some people come onto a racetrack here. If we were to stop these two people right here, right now, before they even get to the racetrack, and maybe there's 20 other people standing outside waiting to see the outcome of these first 4 or 5. Well, if we deal aggressively with that first group and prevent them from getting their voice heard or get this, we're not talking about a First Amendment issue at this point. We're talking about safety, public safety. When it comes to shutting down that bridge, now you're affecting commerce, you're affecting industry. Perhaps you've got a woman who's 9 months pregnant about to go into labor and she's counting on crossing that bridge. And now she can't because of this protest. That's not a First Amendment issue. That's trespassing and it's illegal activity that we have to stop. And when we don't stop it right away, if we come across as being passive with this or hesitant to deal with it, this gains momentum very quickly. And now it becomes a much larger, more exponentially difficult problem to solve. Well, if you let it go 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, the key is to act quickly.
Yeah, I was just down in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, Lieutenant, where there was a couple other events that we were working, and by the way, your officers were fantastic. What they were explaining is the need for the security company to understand what trespassing means and what kind of verbiage you have to communicate to people. Can you talk a little bit about that so that it puts you in a position to be able to help respond in a private event setting versus a public demonstration?
Yes. So for us, whether private or public, it's kind of the same. So our NRS, our Nevada Rise statute, is 207-200. It basically says if you have a private event and somebody comes onto the private property, the venue itself has to ask the person or let them know that they're not wanted any longer at your location. You have to provide them with the opportunity to leave. If they do not, we will read our NRS 207-200, which basically says, as a duly representative of this property, you're being trespassed. If you come back, and it gives them the warnings if you subject to being cited or arrested. If they do not leave at that time, then the police can intervene. Now it becomes criminal. So we cannot take any actions until it becomes criminal, and the criminal portion kicks in once you warn them, give them the opportunity to leave. And they don't take any of those steps, now we can step in. Public property, we typically run into situations on that when we have a road closure. For instance, Allegiant Stadium. There are a lot of public roads around the stadium that they get temporary permits for to close those roads just so we can use for traffic control. While those are public roads, they become private temporarily during that permit phase. But we try not to do very many trespasses on that because it's one of those sticky ones where it's a public road, but it's being permitted for private event, but then it becomes public again. So it's a tricky one to enforce. But again, our goal here is just to make sure that we try to keep these events safe. We try to work very closely with the event security or the event promoter to try to make sure that these things do not happen. If they do happen, we advise them on the steps they have to take. And once they take them, then we intervene.
And Lou, I think that's the big takeaway, right? Is making sure that our venue operators are having that exchange and know who to go to, who's been designated in advance for the police officers and lieutenants and commanders to know, who's going to be that point of contact for them when it becomes that big. Because again, if you're trying to decide that while it's happening, it's a little bit too late. And to Brad's point, you can't now be as proactive. You're in and out, you're stuck in a responsive mode, and you're behind the 8 ball already.
I'm very supportive of tabletop exercise that Lori mentioned. I think I'm looking at Brad and Kendall. That's where it all gets, where you bake the cake and get that preparation and way out in advance. And I know, Mike, you're involved in many tabletops as well. So I think one of the big takeaways on planning is preparation early enough to get all the resources, to find out what resource you need, ask what you need, right? So that you're prepared. And the word today is prepare. So you're right, Jim. That's the key to the whole really conversation today is preparation as early as possible with the information that they get to prepare for these particular.
I know Lori had touched on it once before, but the DHS has And it can be sometimes a little overwhelming of how much resources that you could provide, Lori. As a fan, I would tell everybody, take her up on the offer. Your PSA is a great, if you don't know who that is, find out who that is. But you don't even need to go there too, Lori. There's other ways you can get all that information. We talked about the website stuff, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about how the interaction between PD and DHS and venue operators can be enhanced, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Jim. And going back to, again, the central idea of pre-coordination, of having relationships. First of all, the PSA, as you mentioned, can really grease the skids on building those relationships. That's, part of what they do is to make sure that they know what all of the local assets are and what the interagency can provide. They can do things like, if it's an open air event, they can help you in applying for, not guaranteed to get, but applying for a temporary flight restriction for drone activity, that kind of thing. So, the PSAs are really, really great resources. On CISA.gov, there are numerous resources, like there's a mass gathering security planning tool. There's a vehicle ramming self-assessment tool. There's a just released vehicle incident prevention and mitigation guide. So all sorts of things like that. And then specific to your question, how does DHS integrate? Actually, not dodging the question, but I wondered if I could throw it over to Lieutenant Bell, because I know DHS was deeply involved in the coordination for the Super Bowl that just happened, and I'm sure that the Las Vegas Police Department was working hand in hand as that occurred. Do you want to speak to that at all, Lieutenant?
Yes, we were working hand in hand with DHS. Our emergency manager was coordinating all our efforts there. We also worked very closely with NFL security, so it was definitely a coordinated planning effort. What I really liked about it is what those planning efforts are is we here in Las Vegas, we're here all the time. DHS, NFL, all those folks are just here part-time. So they really leaned on us to understand what it was that we were asking and needed from them to help make this plan successful. So as we've all been saying here many, many times, the planning early is key to success. But one thing I do want to mention that I was trying to squeeze in there towards the end was a lot of times we have a large events, whether it's the Super Bowl. This week we have a festival with about 65, 70,000 people at it. Next month we're going to have our Electric Daisy Carnival, which is we're shooting for 200,000 people per day for 3 nights. So whether it's something of that significance or it's one where we just have 4 officers, the planning does not matter. So you cannot overlook the small events, because those small ones can turn into big things very quickly.
So then, Commander Hazlett, how are you ensuring that everybody has the same common operating picture when an event and when a protest is happening? How are you disseminating information, and how is the venue coordinating with you?
Sure, it's already been mentioned that coordination, cooperation are key elements to any of this, and working with your private partners, your EMS partners, your emergency management partners, making sure that typically for a large event, it wouldn't be necessarily for a regularly scheduled sporting event, but for those large festivals, those large music venues, you would write an IEP, an action event plan, or AEP, and then that would be shared with all your partners, that they understand your objectives, they understand the situation, how you're communicating, what radio channels you're using, who's in charge of this, who's in charge of that. So an IEP definitely goes a long way to make sure that we're sharing that knowledge, we're sharing the plan. Everybody understands contingencies that we're going to employ if things go sideways on us, if we have a weather event, a natural disaster, if there's a protest, if there's an accident. All of that's listed in a rather, I wouldn't say complex, but a complete IEP takes into account most of those things, if not all of those things.
Yeah, I think, Lou, that's one thing that I've always preached is if you're a venue operator, you absolutely must have that incident action plan integrated with your plan. But in some agencies, let's be candid, in some venues, they're not as connected as they are. Some feel that they can't share that incident action plan with somebody outside of the police department or the fire department or the medics, which is a complete mistake in my opinion. So if you're one of those venues out there that doesn't have that, try to find ways to get to your commanding officer and talk to them about why it's so important that you're a part of that. You should be a trusted advisor. I think, Brad, it looked like you agreed to that, there's a reason why we are a team. And if we don't have all the information, it's hard to kind of act as if. But so if you're one of those folks, keep finding ways to get on that list so that you can be part of that, and give them your plans too, by the way, right? Don't be one of those venues that says my attorneys say I can't do that. I'll call BS on that. You've got to give the police department, the fire department, the medical teams the same information that you're giving to your staff so that you are connected. Maybe, Mike, we talk a little bit about we've done all we can with pre-planning, but yet we still got beat, and there's a whole bunch of people out there, and now we've got teams of people that got to respond to them. And maybe Lindsay can talk a little bit about how to do that, what kind of training we might see. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of our conversation has really focused on the highest level of planning. But the common theme with all of this is that we need to have a plan. And so what our training really focuses on is really reaching everyone at the venue and preparing everyone, because it's everyone's responsibility to know what to do in the event of any type of an incident. So our de-escalation training is focused for everyone at every level. So whether they're taking tickets or they're working behind the concession stand or they're on the security team, we cover things like not just what you say, but how you say it, right? So Lieutenant, you were talking about having the right terminology, but we kind of focus more on how you deliver that message once you have that right terminology. We talk about different ways of communication, effective communication, negotiation, some strategies for having people follow what you are hoping for them to do. And then we also cover mental health. That's another piece that's really important in de-escalation is recognizing when this is not just a protest, when somebody may have some underlying medical issues that need attention, and then how to properly deal with those individuals as well. So we kind of try to put everything in this bundle, and then we also understand that there are time and monetary constraints at every venue, especially when we're talking about thousands of people and volunteers coming into work at an event. So we really try to make things very affordable and time efficient and focused on that adult learner. So you can complete an entire training on de-escalation in about 20-25 minutes. So, and it's a certification. So you have record that everyone's trained, everyone's consistent in what they're doing. And it really is almost that insurance policy that you have in addition to all of the preparation and planning that you do.
And then what are the methods that you provide this training to different venues or different organizations?
So any type of electronics, so people can access it on their phone, their computers, any way that they need to, and they can stop it and pick up when they want to as well. So if they're working on something, they have 15 minutes, they can get started on it, and when they pick back up, they're right in the spot they left off. So it's very user-friendly. Everything is stored on a learning management system. All the records are kept. So if you needed to pull a record on somebody to say they did their training, we can give those records to you, or you can access them yourself, either way. So it's a very, very simple process.
Very good.
Well, I think, one of the other things I was kind of hoping that maybe Brad and even Mike and Kendall can talk a little bit about, well, Lori too, but is the political aspect of some of these protests and how, whether it's the mayor and the city council and those types of folks that the law enforcement may have to kind of contend with, or the brand concerns that presidents and owners of teams and venues have to be mindful about. Maybe you talk a little bit about those impacts and then on a public relations or a community relations perspective, how maybe Illich sports and entertainment would kind of engage that. So I kind of throw it out to the group a little bit to understand, the importance of having tie-in with all of those entities. But, I guess, Brad, maybe start with you. If you guys already, I think, have it built into your plans what your tactics are, maybe you talk about what you don't have to do or when you do have to do certain things that might escalate it up to the political consideration.
Well, I think we would be kidding ourselves if we tried to convince ourselves that there isn't some political impact on all of these types of issues. The key for us is treat everybody the same, make sure that we're always honoring First Amendment issues. But we certainly can't afford to treat one group, whether it's a political group, and then treat the opposite political group in a different way. Things have got to be best practices. They've got to be equal for everybody. And bottom line is public safety trumps, political viewpoints. We can't allow people to take over events. We can't allow people to interrupt commerce, transportation because they belong to this group but not that group.
Sure.
So the key is to treat everybody the same, treat everybody with respect. And then, we always want to make sure that we're honoring those First Amendment issues. But when it crosses a line and becomes an illegal activity, we've got to take action, regardless of what affiliation they may have.
And I think that's, to echo what Brad just stated, really need to treat every group equally, but we need to communicate to our fans and our ticket holders what our policies are in our venues. So no political signs, no political statements. Make sure that everybody knows coming in, no matter what the group is, we are not going to allow those type of activities that might disrupt the game, and then being uniform in how we enforce that. And then if it starts to impact play, as we just saw in Minnesota with someone jumping onto the court, obviously we're going to take action in conjunction with the rules of the leagues, and we're going to stop that. But really need to communicate with our fans on our websites, on our social media site. These are our policies right from the get-go.
Yeah, good stuff, Lou. We got a good team here.
Well, it's been a wonderful experience this morning here with the town hall. As we wrap up, any other final comments from our team here before we? Kinder, what would you leave everybody with? A couple of words.
The same thing I always tell everybody when I go and talk around the country is the relationships, folks. We have to start these processes early. We have to work together. As funny as it sounds, our fire departments teach in our police departments teach in our fire academies. We incorporate all of our resort partners in all of our training and our planning efforts. So everybody has that buy-in. So everybody wants to make sure that we're successful. Because I mentioned before, we are a tourism destination, which is probably different than other cities. And we have to make sure we protect that. So everyone, regardless of where you work, what property you're from, all has to come together. But it all starts with that communication, coordination, and cooperation.
Very good. Good leave behind. Brad, what do you want to leave behind?
That situational awareness is the cornerstone of security, whether it be personal security, public safety, all of those things. And I perhaps want to set the stage for our next town hall and talk about how we protect large public events and sporting stadiums from what's likely to happen next. Is you're going to see ISIS is pushing out there that they want to attack large gatherings of people. They just did that in Moscow, and they're certainly pushing for that here. And I think we needed to have discussions about that next. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very well said. Lori, your leave behind.
Totally agree with what the others have said here, including Brad's comment right there, which I think takes us right back to where we started with Director Ray's comments. And he did note, different types of violence include domestic and foreign terrorism. There is always the possibility of fan violence. One A researcher has said 39.2% of fans report having witnessed a crime, including a violent crime around an NFL stadium, and then crowd crush, in addition to what we've been talking about here, protests and civil disturbances. A lot of stakeholders are not as big as the NFL. They don't have those kinds of budgets to be able to put resources in place, human resources and otherwise. I would point them to federal resources, things that are free, including de-escalation resources, which I just shot a link over to the team to be able to put that out there too. But take advantage of what is free and available and keep communicating, keep preparing, stay situationally aware, all of the things that we have just talked about here to prevent any kind of harm to those public gatherings.
Very well said. Mike, as the moderator, you're a leave behind for everybody.
Relationships are critical in that when something like this is starting to crop up, you need to know who to call, and they need to know, your partners need to know who to call as well. So you have to have close relationships before any of this even begins to brew.
And it's my leave behind is tabletop exercises. The key to this conversation here this morning. Go way out early and find your gaps and close them so you're prepared. Okay. And then Lindsay, you leave behind.
My leave behind is really empower your whole team and consider those who need to be prepared, and not just your core staff, but also the volunteers and the temporary people who are coming in to work these big events, and make sure that they have the tools and expectations as well. So training is so important and is part of that piece of preparation.
All right, turn over to my great colleague.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Listen, I think mine would be focusing on how to do those things and celebrating the Italian, all right, and the Irish in me. I would say break bread with those folks, right? So find ways to break bread with one another, whether it's over a lunch or it's dinners or if it's cocktails, whatever. Get to know them, and I say them, your public safety officials, and them and you, in a manner that is not just hello, Lieutenant, right? It's, hey, Kendall, it's Brad, how are you, right? And talk about the things and the struggles that some of you are making, so that you're becoming a little bit more than just colleagues. You're becoming a little bit of a friendship. I'm big on creating friendships with each other. We're people, and this is a people business that we're in. And you always hear me talk about it, Lou. The three things that are important to me is people, process, and technology. And if you don't have those three in balance, if you don't have those humbly kind of connected, you're kidding yourself that your event's going to run as well. So break bread with the people, celebrate each other and appreciate each other, and kind of move on that way. And you're going to get much, much more out of the relationship than I think you bargained for. So I'll leave it with that. But listen, again, thanks again to everybody. Mike, great job keeping the conversation going, and to Brad and Kendall, Lindsay and Lori, and certainly behind the scenes, Chris, the man behind the scenes that makes all this stuff kind of work for us. Lou, he's just a great asset. So
I'm going to follow up what Jim just said. Thank you, everyone. Great for the folks out listening. This will be on YouTube pretty soon. Chris will get it up and running for you. If you want to get especially getting all the resources that you saw from us, you'll be able to get those as well. So thank you, all of you, and everyone out there. Have a good day. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.